She said, if you're not ready to start covering everything the way a real partner would, then maybe I need to rethink who I'm building a future with. She didn't raise her voice. She said it calmly, like a conclusion she'd already reached. We were standing in the kitchen, bills spread out on the counter, and she was tapping her phone like the numbers were obvious, and I was just slow. This wasn't a conversation. It was an ultimatum dressed up as maturity. We'd been sharing finances for a year. Joint account for rent, utilities, groceries. Separate cards for personal stuff. That was the agreement we both said felt fair. I made a little more than she did, but not enough to carry two adults without noticing. She slid her phone toward me and pointed at the total. This is what I need you to start covering, at least until things stabilize. The number was higher than usual. Not by a little. I asked what changed. She said inflation, unexpected expenses, life. I didn't argue, I just asked to see the breakdown. That's when the second problem surfaced. She hesitated, then unlocked her banking app and scrolled too fast. I caught glimpses before she realized it. Multiple charges I didn't recognize. A boutique hotel, airline upgrades, a subscription I knew wasn't cheap. I asked what those were. She sighed like I was exhausting. Why are you interrogating me? I didn't think you get controlling. That word landed on purpose. I reminded her we had a shared account. If she wanted me to cover more, I needed to understand why. That was basic. She rolled her eyes and said, I didn't hide anything. I just didn't think I had to justify every little thing. But these weren't little things. When she finally slowed down, the pattern was obvious. Over the last few months, she'd been draining her personal account, then quietly using the joint one to fill gaps. Not for emergencies, for comfort. Trips she took without telling me. Dinners with co-workers she never mentioned. Clothes still in bags in the back of the closet. I asked why she didn't say anything earlier. She said she didn't want to stress me out. Then she said, and honestly, if we're serious, you stepping up financially shouldn't feel like a burden. That's when I understood the shape of it. The ultimatum wasn't about money. The money was already gone. This was about locking me into covering the consequences without asking questions. I told her I wasn't comfortable with the joint account being used that way, that we needed clearer boundaries if we were going to keep sharing finances. She crossed her arms and leaned back against the counter. So what? You don't trust me now? I said trust wasn't the issue. Transparency was. She laughed, sharp and short. Every guy says that when he wants control. That was new. Until then, she'd always framed me as steady, reliable, safe. Now suddenly, I was the obstacle. She told me I was being dramatic, that everyone has phases, that she'd supported me in other ways emotionally, and this was just my turn to carry more weight. I asked what more meant exactly and for how long. She said, I don't know, but if you're really committed, you won't nickel and dime the person you love. There it was again. Commitment as leverage. I looked at the account history more closely. Some charges lined up with nights she'd said she was working late. One was a weekend she'd told me she needed space and went to clear her head. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just asked who she'd gone with. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, why does it matter? Because shared finances meant shared risk. Because I was being asked to cover debts I didn't create. Because this wasn't an accident. She told me I was overthinking it, that this conversation was proof I wasn't ready for the kind of partnership she wanted. Then she repeated it, slower this time. Either you step up, or I need to reconsider us. No yelling, no tears. Just a clean line drawn where she thought I couldn't afford to step back. I said I needed time to think. She shook her head. I've already waited long enough. That night, she went to bed without another word. I stayed in the kitchen, scrolling through statements, doing math that didn't add up to a future I recognized. By the time I turned off the lights, I wasn't angry. I was clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a system she'd already been running, and she was ready to make me the permanent fix. Update 1. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. She made coffee, asked if I wanted eggs, and talked about a weekend trip she was thinking about booking. It wasn't an apology. It was a reset, assuming the pressure had worked. I told her we needed to finish the conversation from the night before. She sighed and sat down, already annoyed. I don't want to rehash this. I was clear. I said I'd looked through the accounts more closely, not to catch her, But because I needed to understand what I was being asked to absorb, she immediately went defensive. So you're spying now. I told her I wasn't accusing her of cheating or lying. I was pointing out numbers. Overdraft fees quietly covered by transfers. Cash advances I didn't know about. Payments shifted from her card to the joint account without a heads up. She waved her hand. It's not that serious. I asked why. If it wasn't serious, she needed me to suddenly cover everything. She leaned forward. Because I'm tired of struggling while you sit on savings. That wasn't true. My savings existed because I didn't live beyond my means. Because I planned. Because I didn't assume someone else would clean up after me. I told her the ultimatum didn't work on me. That if she wanted partnership, it had to be transparent and mutual, not pressure-based. She laughed again. This is exactly what I mean. You always need control. Money is just how you do it. That was the moment I realized there was no version of this conversation where I wasn't the villain unless I complied. I asked her one last thing. I asked if there was anything else I didn't know about. Any debts, trips, or obligations that might land in my lap next. She hesitated. Not long, just long enough. Then she said, "Why would I tell you things that would make you judge me?" That answer was clean. I told her I wasn't stepping up to cover her finances, that I wasn't comfortable staying in a shared account situation where I had no say but full responsibility. She crossed her arms. So that's it? You're backing out because things got real? I said no. I was stepping out because things got dishonest. She stood up, pacing now. You're seriously going to throw this away over money? I didn't respond to the framing. I told her my decision. We would separate finances immediately. The joint account would be closed. Any remaining shared bills would be split evenly until the end of the month, then handled individually. No more transfers. No more covering gaps. She stared at me like I just told her I was leaving the country. You can't just do that, she said. I'm counting on that account. I said, that's the problem. She accused me of abandoning her, of pulling support when she needed it most, of proving I was selfish. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I told her the logistics and the timeline, calmly. That silence from me made her louder. She said I was punishing her, that I was trying to teach her a lesson, that I was being cruel. I reminded her this was her structure too. She'd agreed to equal contribution and personal responsibility. I wasn't changing the rules. I was enforcing them. She asked what she was supposed to do now. I said she'd have to adjust, the same way I would if our positions were reversed. That's when the mask slipped. She said, so after everything I've given you, you're just cutting me off? I said I wasn't cutting her off. I was opting out. That afternoon, I went to the bank. I closed the joint account with notice, documented everything, and transferred my remaining portion out. I left her share untouched and notified her in writing of the final balances. When I got home, she was on the phone, pacing, voice tight. She hung up when she saw me. They froze my card, she said. The joint one. It declined. I told her the account was in transition, like I'd explained. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she finally realized I wasn't bluffing. By the end of the week, the first consequence hit. One of her automatic payments bounced. Not rent. Something personal. Something she'd clearly assumed the shared account would cover. She didn't say anything to me about it. She didn't have to. The silence told me everything I needed to know. Final update. Once the joint account was gone, everything started surfacing on its own. Bills she used to wave away suddenly mattered. Subscriptions she forgot she'd stacked began hitting her personal card back to back. Late fees appeared where there hadn't been any before. None of it involved me anymore, and that made it louder. She tried to keep the same routines at first, same coffee runs, same online orders. The difference was she started checking her phone after every transaction, like she didn't trust the ground under her anymore. I stayed out of it. A week later, she asked if we could temporarily rebalance things. She said it casually, like a scheduling question. I told her no. I didn't explain. After that, she stopped asking me for anything directly. The pressure came from elsewhere. One evening, she came home quiet and went straight to the bedroom. Later, I heard her on the phone, voice low, saying she might need help, just for a bit. The tone wasn't anger, it was damage control. She started selling things online. Shoes I'd never seen her wear. A bag she'd insisted was an investment. The listings went up fast, price to move. I kept my distance. We still shared the apartment, but the space between us felt finalized. Then small systems started failing. Her credit card company called one night while I was in the room. She didn't answer, but the name on the screen told the story. After that, her spending slowed to almost nothing. She missed a dinner she'd been excited about because she wasn't feeling well. A few days later, I saw the charge refund hit her account. Non-refundable, partially recovered. A loss she had to accept. The coworker she'd been seeing so often stopped coming up in conversation. Not because anything dramatic happened, because dinners and trips cost money when someone else isn't quietly absorbing the edges. I finalized my own plans quietly. I rerouted my paycheck, updated my automatic payments, changed nothing else. A month after the joint account closed, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." I said, "I know." That was the closest we came to a real conversation. The relationship didn't explode. It thinned out. Less talking, less shared space, less overlap. Eventually, she moved her things into the spare room, not as a threat, as an adjustment. When the lease ended, I renewed alone. She left without drama, no accusations, no speeches, just a quiet recalculation of what she could afford and where. The last thing she said to me was, "I guess I misjudged how much you'd tolerate." I nodded. That was accurate. There was no satisfaction in watching it unravel. Just confirmation. I didn't take anything from her. I didn't expose her. I didn't punish her. I just stopped paying for a version of partnership that only existed when I covered the bill. After that, everything resolved itself.